Signaling, perfect. Okay, awesome. So I want to introduce Alex from RetinadVR as well. He's kind of on our data specializing team. Alex, you want to say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello from snowy and blustery Montreal. I'm super excited to be with you. So yeah, just intro really fast. So I'll let you go ahead, and then I'll go ahead and talk more about what we do.
So I'll do a quick introduction about ourselves. So I'm from LumièreVR, and what we do is production in 360 and live action VR films. We've been working with a lot of brands like NASA, FIFA, NBA, and these guys, and our goal is to push the art form of storytelling. And of course, you know, storytelling is so new right now that everyone's kind of in the dark. So we need Alex's analytics tool from RetinadVR to really kind of guide us to what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, Alex, you want to tell us a bit of yourself?
Yeah, so thanks again. Super excited to be here, as I said. And I think what's really great about this talk is that we'll be using data and data insights to help form one of the biggest issues, which you just said, being blind in 360 filmmaking, which is exactly what RetinadVR does. We provide essentially a compass for filmmakers to be able to navigate what is and what is not working through heat maps and through other data analytics tools to understand what kind of visual and audio cues people have interacted with. So really excited to go over that in further detail.
Sounds good. So to begin with, I think we should start with a backstory. So one of the things that I really like to compare VR films today with is silent film. So 360 film today is the beginning of a new medium, and everyone can sense the excitement around it, but no one really is sure how it will work. Motion pictures you see today, you know, with James Cameron, with Spielberg and all that, it's the result of, you know, decades and decades of perfection and testing. All the flashy effects and tricks never really existed back in the days. And in fact, our name LumièreVR is an extended tribute to the late Lumière brothers who created motion picture in 1895. We find ourselves often in the same position of exploring and navigating the waters of storytelling the exact same way they did back in the days. So that's a little bit of a backstory. So with the rise of a new medium comes new constraints and possibilities, and it's of the most importance to kind of explore those possibilities. So what exactly is 360 filmmaking? To begin with, we first have to discuss the notion on why people don't think 360 constitute as VR, and why VR, what VR is and why that doesn't matter at all. The biggest argument is that VR is an alternate reality, and reality is about choices and decisions. Your life is made of, you know, all the decisions you've made leading up to today. So then, most obviously, in virtual reality, we should also be offered the same kind of choices. Then, of course, film is a very passive experience. It's usually enjoyed when you're, you know, home from work, relaxing on a couch, and you simply just want to be entertained. Nonetheless, it doesn't really matter what you call it. VR 360 film is a new medium of entertainment that allow you to be fully immersed in the world while watching a story unfold. Where Chris Mill calls it the ultimate empathy machine, filmmakers simply see it as a new opportunity to tell their stories. So what about 360 content today and all the flashy news you hear on Kickstarters and Indiegogo about new cameras coming out? Most of them are quite garbage in terms of VR. The things you see with, you know, the Ricoh Theta, the Samsung 360, and the Insta360s, they look great on Facebook, but when you really put them into a headset, you know, the Insta360 turns into what we call Insta, you know, motion sickness. The resolution is simply too low for any professional to hold or use. And of course, there's the more serious studios like, I guess, Hollywood and Bollywood who would use bigger cameras like Jaunt, Odyssey, and Ozo. But even that, you know, they're magnificent pieces of engineering, but, you know, the keyword here is engineering. To really get engineers to understand art, you know, it's harder than, you know, getting Trump to understand politics or something. What we learn, you know, what we learn here is one size does not fit all. And our studio, you know, is a combination of engineers and artists, and we work day in and day out trying to perfect, what kind of camera, what kind of lenses really work for every kind of situations. So for example, after hours, we need to use certain kind of sensors in order to capture low lights. GoPros will never be able to handle anything after 8 p.m., and that's a big problem. Another thing is, like, if you want to do moving shots or films that have a more lively component to it, you really need to perfect how you use drones. And the difficulty here is that by even just touching the camera while it's stable gives you motion sickness. So we have to create separate algorithms to really find out how exactly like the camera should move to make it more human-like and cancel out that motion sickness and nauseating effect. Then of course you have to find out different scenarios calls for different kind of setups. For example, sports and athletics. Here we found out that 360 isn't really the key. The key is 3D, and of course, the more cameras you use, and the more I guess every time you do 3D, every time you turn something stereo, the resolution goes down. So instead, we know that most people want to focus on the players and not the audience behind them. We use a 180 solution. That way, we can push the resolution up to about 6K. Then of course, there's a live streaming and various other camera setups. So once we solve this problem, comes the bigger problem. What about the art form? Cameras we can figure out, cameras we can research, cameras we can really just test and come up with a quick solution of, okay, this looks good on screen, this doesn't look good on screen. But what we really have to figure out here, and why Alex is so important, is that how do we push the evolution of the art form? Because the audience, that's the biggest barrier of entry, right? How do we get the audience to actually be immersed and actually like what we do? Most 360 content today involves one camera in the center of some kind of square or some kind of concert or a place with a lot of people, and what you get is really boring stuff. It's novel for the first 30 seconds, but then it gets really boring, and you can't really tell a story when everything just stays the same. So I guess Alex will explain a little bit about how we work together as artists and data scientists, and then we'll keep it as a dialogue, so we can ask similar questions or maybe overlapping questions that you guys might have. And here we're going to explore what the grammar of VR is, how we break down VR storytelling, and how we actually begin to direct a piece in virtual reality. So go ahead, Alex.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. I think that's a great summary, Travis, about the state of how things are in 360 and filmmaking today. I think you highlighted something really important, which was how do you really make quality content? The engineering is behind it right now, and it seems like it's 8K and 16K cameras coming out. It's a little bit almost too advanced if people are just starting to experience VR, especially 360 VR on Facebook, right? You're not gonna most displays on laptops and cell phones don't even support that resolution. So it seems like overkill for a medium that's just trying to figure out its artistic kind of voice. So this is where data comes in, right? And the most important, so most creatives would never think of looking at data, but unless you're Netflix, they did a really compelling kind of piece as to the importance of data and creativity and creative with 2D, so kind of traditional filmmaking. So what they did was, and this is super important for understanding how that translates to 360 film and the art that is 360 video, is what they did is with House of Cards, for those of you familiar with the series, I'm sure as Netflix's own kind of viewership reports that many, probably 4 to 5 viewers right now have seen the show. This is a really popular kind of IP that Netflix brought along. What they did is they looked at where people were accessing the content from, how they knew kind of like what people's behaviors were, what their patterns of content consumption were prior to purchasing the IP for House of Cards, and they made a really informed decision. Now, of course, you can never know empirically, but what they did find out was, based on how people were kind of looking at the previews of the show, that this would be really successful. So they bought for $100 million, as we know, 2 seasons of it, and kind of that was the details down, and kind of history was made at that point where that IP is really what spearheaded Netflix into the realm that is now online media and online digital content consumption. away from taking a large line share away from cable providers. So why is that super important for 360? So what they learned was, again, from those patterns of behaviors, we want to be able to translate that over to 360. So if we borrow from looking at why 2D media, I guess the limitations of 2D media, if you go to the next slide, so you've got a horizontal field of view, vertical field of view, and it's very limited. So people are consuming it mobile, their homes, and on laptops, on their personal computers, and that's great, right? However, it's extremely limiting. So everything that the medium that is film, the way it's been transposed has been limited to this 2D kind of screen, what's incredible about VR is that if you go to the next slide, you get this extremely immersive bubble, right? You get this 360 sphere that you're able to, and you sent me this video of this photo of kind of a cat yesterday, which I kind of wish we used that photo, peering into this world. So like, whereas a user is able to jump right into the middle of a scene, be displaced right away, jump, and immerse themselves entirely and capture this field of view that wraps all around them. Now, I know everybody that's watching VR is going, okay, great, we know all of this, but it's super important to understand that for the medium, because directors right now are just doing it wrong. So what our data has shown is that when you expand that window and that field of view, a lot of people just aren't looking at the audio and directed cues. What I've noticed, just even anecdotally, a lot of people just tend to kind of, when they put on the headset for the first or second, even third time, they just kind of tend to look forward, or they'll look around and kind of be like, oh, okay, like I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, and then take off the headset in frustration more than anything. And that signals to me that the medium is failing early on. That's really, really bad for a medium, as we're seeing headsets are not being pushed out of the gates as fast as we thought it should be. It's very dangerous if we're not, as content creators, getting the medium right. Is all that clear? Because I'd love your kind of, if you got any questions, maybe the viewers could jump in right now, or obviously if you got kind of any insights on that, because I know that you're on the content creation side, so I might be pulling some strings on your side. Yeah,
so that's really that's really hitting spot on for us, because we test our content with your systems all the time, and like you said, only 50% of the people actually look around. The other half simply don't understand it. And we've been using your tracking, we've been using your live heat maps as a powerful tool. And what we realized is, yes, you're right. Everybody is focused on just your small movements inside the clip, or maybe just focus forward, because they're not trained to look around yet. And I'm moving to the heat map slide, where I'm presenting kind of what your thing looks like here. So this is kind of an example of something we shot that's bad, because all these heat map is dispersed everywhere, and then what that tells us as filmmakers is we didn't do a really good job directing the user attention to where they should be looking at. And Alex here is telling us with his software that, hey, maybe we need some bigger gestures and bigger movements to direct people to where we want them to look. Now, the more dispersed the heat map is, the more distracted people are. And like he said, most people who put on the headset for the first or second time, they either look straight forward, or they're looking around blindly trying to find something to look at, or maybe it's the novelty that's getting to them. And even with more experienced VR viewers, they're not used to a mature storytelling method. Hence why they're still looking around trying to really just see everything. But in fact, we're not trying to get them to see everything. Most of the background or backdraws are simply there just to give you the immersion. They're not the focal point at all. So yeah, back to you, Alex.
So what have you seen that's been the most kind of successful? So I've got, like as you're showing from your video that you filmed in China, most people are looking forward, So I'll just kind of describe that slide. So what are we actually looking at now? So you divide the 360 sphere into kind of equal parts. You get front, left, right, back, down, and up. That's just kind of the parameters in which we define areas in which people will look. And you notice it's kind of like donut chart showing you, 85% of people, 84.3, are looking forward, and that's really, really bad in VR. And that sounds like an obvious insight. It's just for directors to know, okay, I do have to make people look around. Otherwise, they're just going to drop. They're going to take off the headset and really not care. And people could argue, well, the whole point of VR is to give somebody this kind of sense of immersion and presence, and I kind of wanted them looking forward. It's for them to just. I go, yeah, sure, great, but you don't want them spending the entire or the majority of the time looking forward, or just kind of looking in that front sector. It doesn't mean they're not looking around. It just kind of means they're not engaging with the 360 environment in the way that it's supposed to be engaged with. So that's why if you look to the right, we've kind of defined the parameters like this gauge, it says statue, 2D movement, 360 video, and Explorer. That's really how well using our software we're able to calculate and define the kind of movement pattern that people have, or their head movement pattern of people looking around. So at the end of the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Explorer, and that's for kind of the best kind of content. So if you go to the next slide, this is from better content. That's exactly what good content should look like, right? It should be balanced. So I'm wondering how you, Travis, how are you able to take that key learning from the video that you had, that first video, and how do you get people to hit them over the head? Because a lot of people just will look around maybe a little bit, but how do you hit them over the head and not overdo it? So the other opposite of the side, we were just discussing this before this call, is where you have a director that will put 300 things in people's field of view and overwhelm the user. It's what for you is the balance? I'm really curious to hear from you.
Yeah, so for us, I guess we've been trying, all sorts of different cues that we'll get into later as we plan storyboarding. Some of the audience is asking how storyboarding kind of works for VR and how do we plan everything or plan a flow. The key here, the short answer, the key here is really to not make the user move too much at the beginning, ease them in with darker scenes so their eyes adjust to the screen being lit. And as the screen slowly brightens up, introduce minor cues. Small cues, for example, maybe a bird flying to the right, getting them to follow the bird to the right, or maybe someone walks by or someone's having a conversation, or use your stereo audio, right? Use your, you can use the Zoom 6, or you can use the, Dysonics. Those guys are doing an awesome job with stereo sound to really guide the users to look a certain way, but make sure they're not looking, full 180 degrees. Make sure they're only moving maybe at 30 degrees angle at a time. And we'll get into, how the storyboard is set up in VR in a second, and as we continue. So I guess we're gonna primarily be analyzing Stranger Things today. We're gonna write a piece about, we're gonna start posting documents and case studies about our own pieces. But for today, for the sake of pushing forward with Netflix and everything, we're going to talk about Stranger Things and the analysis that I guess Alex has done on it and what we learned from it.
So we just had those are really good insights. By the way, I'd love to, as you were telling the users, to direct them later on to our blog. We'll have it up on our site on the slides. So I think getting the early grammar of VR is so essential, because otherwise we're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. So Stranger Things is something that we had decided to build just to test internally, just for fun, because it's a personal favorite show of mine. And Netflix being great content, we wanted to see if they really had great content for 360. So we evaluated a piece that they had posted actually up on YouTube, where the Demogorgon kind of monster, it's like a scare scene. So we'll just go through 360 storyboarding first. This is kind of what it looks like. This is board actually from Jessica Brilhart, who's the top director for Google Jump VR. And what she does is kind of like game storyboarding theory, which is she'll separate the 360 scene into these kind of rings. And then the blue dots will represent, that you can see on the sphere here, the rings, is kind of visual cues throughout the scene. So if you're looking forward, kind of the top of this circles would be the front, and then the bottom portion of this would be the back. And you're looking, just so the viewers know, you're looking at this from like a bird's eye view. And then the yellow dots represent the audio cues. So from scene 1, you can see that there's like the main kind of action. The Netflix logo hits you right in front, and then you've kind of got audio cues and visual cues spread throughout the rest of the scene. So you can see in the second, the comparison between the second and the third ring is like a kind of this natural progression or evolution in visual and audio cues. So I think that Netflix, just borrowing for what you just said, Travis, is easing them in and making them kind of like move around 30 degrees at a time. Looks like just from this, like Netflix, these are the pieces that we have borrowed from Netflix throughout the scene. It looks like Netflix is kind of succeeding, so that's good news. So if you go to the next slide, to put the viewers in context, this is where the mother, Winona Ryder, receives a phone call from her son, Will, who's in the underworld. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I won't give any spoilers, but essentially you're guided through the scene with a flashlight. And this was a really cool kind of visual cue and directional tool that we saw used. So the flashlight at the beginning of the scene moves you around. So it really allows you to, like I said, like hits the viewer over the head so you can actually explore the scene. And we tracked that flashlight success in how much people engaged with that little, I guess, bubble where the flashlight was looking around, moving you around. And we tracked how successful that was and how much people interacted with it. So the first kind of 15 seconds of that minute, you see that nearly 90% of people are looking at it, they're interacting with it, and it's forward. And then as time goes on, if you look to the right kind of sector, it says 50, so you're moving to your right, to your left. There's this kind of bell phone ringing. A lot of people drop off and they're exploring. So it kind of shows you that even despite directional tools, people will still choose to disengage. And this I just want to interject as well to say that that's something that's really interesting to see. That's what Steven Spielberg came out and said maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And so this is why 360 and VR is really dangerous of a medium for filmmaking, because people can just choose to disengage. So just moving around the circle, you're able to see again. People kind of re-engage a little bit, and then to your left, you can see 68% of people then engage with this flashlight. You could say, okay, why is there a spike from 87 down to 50, again 53 and 68? What happens is that there's a loud crash and there's a loud noise, and it's super cool to see that audio cue, how successful it is in re-engaging the audience. That nearly 1 out of 2 had disengaged with that audio. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see how this is a key next scene where there's a phone ringing, and it says, the son you can hear on the other side, Will, says, hello, can you hear me? You have to listen, turn around, it's behind you, turn around. He says that twice, it's behind you, turn around. So it's really, again, using an audio cue and visual cue to really hit the audience over the head to make them look around. And what we found is that this audio cue had an extremely an amazing success rate, with 100% of people looking around, which is phenomenal when you think about that, compared to previously when a lot of people dropped off.
So I guess the key takeaway here is that audio works a lot better than visual in terms of 360 contents, right?
Correct, because you could choose to disengage, right? And the audio here is incredible. An incredible, I think a very overlooked tool. I think a lot of people, filmographers, know the importance of audio, but we can't stress it enough on. And Travis, this is something that you and I are working on, is testing the actual power of audio and getting those data-driven insights.
Yeah, so we're going to release a case study really soon. So if you guys are interested, you can follow the blog that we're going to post later. So we're testing, whether or not spatial audio with surround sound has a big effect in VR as compared to maybe headphones and different kinds of other alternatives. So that's going to be very exciting to find. And some of the data points is looking very, very optimistic at this point. So yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next slide about the activity score.
Right. So I think for a lot of people, these insights can be, kind of interesting or good to know and nice to have, and oh, sweet, I know what's working, what's not. But it's kind of so what? Okay, cool. What's next? So something very proprietary to VR is understanding how frequently and how quickly people are moving their headset around. So I guess I call it, for lack of a better word, headset velocity or headset activity or head movement activity. And what we're calculating here is knowing, I guess, kind of the frequency of movement. So if you look here, what we've done is we've shown you those kind of key scenes, and then so the flashlight, the phone, and then the monster, and we're able to detect how frequently people are moving their heads around. And we kind of have this little blue band that you can see that shows you how well people are sticking inside that blue band. That blue band, what we've done through our internal research at RetinadVR, is shown that as a director, that's where generally you want to keep regardless of genre, you want to keep your audience in. Otherwise, you risk, if it goes too low, so if you notice kind of like second 40 and timestamp 40, it drops a little bit below that. If it goes, we've seen study or videos where it goes, the entire video is like that, and that's where people are looking for it, and that's boring. It's really, just to put it in layman's terms, just boring content. Now, if you jump ahead to where the monster is, the activity spikes, and that's because, as he says, look behind you, he then scares, the monster comes out and scares, and when we were doing this test internally, we saw a lot of people like jerk their head back or jump up. It's really awesome to see. So you get this huge spike, but if that's really, really good and demonstrates that kind of artistic and creative cue and freedom working, but what you don't want it to look at the opposite end is if people are moving their heads around way too much. That's what I was talking to you about, Travis, before, which is that video where there's like infinite amounts of elements of things that people look at, people just get overwhelmed, and then they might have motion sickness, which is, or they're at high risk to achieve motion sickness. So that's really, really bad. So as a director, what's cool is you can use data to kind of confirm and to show kind of where people are dropping off and getting bored, or where they're going to be getting nauseous, which is super important for VR. So that's our activity score, and I'm super happy to be co-developing that alongside you, Travis. And if we could make that genre specific, so you can kind of get a blue band for like fear, or blue band for joy. That type of stuff would be really fun to develop with you. And I think that we are working on it, coming out with something in the future, right?
Exactly. The thing with genres in VR, right, it's that it's incredibly difficult because genre, usually in traditional filmmaking, you just have your action, your romance, your comedy, all that kind of stuff, and it's generally okay because people are separated from the medium. What we found is that when we try to put people into a world where they feel innately vulnerable, where you can't see your hands, your feet, and your body, this is something that's very, very different. It's a very different experience than watching a traditional film on TV, and to be able to subdivide genre, I think we have to come up with a completely different set of grammar and different rules in terms of subdividing categories in VR. And then to be able to generate that kind of activity scores, we have to look at a bunch of patterns, and so this archetype of users are looking a certain way, and they're behaving very similarly while watching these kind of content, and we just draw a circle and kind of almost using machine learning to segment out this being a category, and we can name it whatever later. But I don't really know if categorizing horror or thriller is going to be the right way to do it in VR. But yeah, that's again something we're exploring, and we'll probably come up with another case study the following week for this, after our first one, or something like that.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
So I guess the question now is, kind of leading on, what about rhythm and pace, right? What about, it's really important in a film to keep rhythm, right? To have your pace to really guide the user into the next scene and the next scene and the scene after that.
Yeah, so for rhythm and pace, I guess the activity score is something that will help you with that. Now, the one caveat or catch I'd say is that that's up to the artist to get right. Where data stops is just telling you kind of like, here's what we know is happening. Now it's up to you to take that data and be contextual with it and understand how you use those key insights. And for rhythm and pace, if you were to look at this and just be kind of compulsive about the blue band, then you would have never made that decision to scare people. But it's using those artistic insights and saying, I'm going to go off the Richter scale and scare the user. I'm going to use your own kind of insights yourself. And that's something we can't account for, right? And data can never account for. But that's why both are so beautiful working together. So I guess just to finish on activity score, because I'm also getting sensitive for time, and I would love to hear from the audience if there's any kind of Q&A. I guess if we jump ahead just to kind of best practices, I guess for rhythm and design, what you really care about is making it obvious and intentional, again, hitting users over the head. And then just, always assume that you're going to lose some viewers. So what you want to do is place cues just to really re-engage to re-engage your audience. So again, if you're going to think you're going to lose, where you're noticing early on in prototyping or in pre-visualization where you're losing some kind of audience members, what you would want to do is maybe add an audio cue and really overemphasize that point. For you, it might be obnoxious, but for a viewer, that's actually a sweet spot where you really want people staying inside your experience. And again, the Goldilocks band of activity. So not too fast and not too slow. Just kind of get it just right. And make people not bored and not motion sick. So it's up to creators to hit that sweet spot. So on that, I'll let you kind of take it away, Travis. That's my question.
Yeah, sounds good. So I want to kind of end with this slide. So if you have any questions about data, let Alex know. If you have any questions about production and tools, send me an email, and also kind of like follow our blogs that we're going to be pushing more heavily next year. And I guess we're going to move to a Q&A really quickly. I'm going to read them out so you can hear them as well, Alex. So one of our audience is asking, can you overscare people in 360 experiences, or can the experience be something seen as too immersive? And for me, I don't think something can be too immersive. I think you can really play with how you create that suspension of disbelief, how you really put people into your world, the world that you created, and get them to feel, like it's real. There is a fear of vulnerability. People coming into VR innately feel vulnerable. So it depends on the kind of pieces. If you're working on a scare piece, definitely try to make them feel more comfortable at first, and then scare them. So I think there's nothing known as too immersive. But definitely something, or definitely something to work on. I don't think there's something known as too immersive at this point. Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, so I think it's a great point. I was just thinking, what we saw early on in the Hitchcock days was, rather than something being too scary, which was like the overabundance of, let's say, a monster or something that you could caricaturize or put it like paint. Kind of like an image on. What Hitchcock said is like, we just have the absence of something and let the audience's imagination guide their fear. So that, to me, in VR, so if you're looking at data, you would get like a necessarily high activity score, so on and so forth. But what would be amazing is that's probably the scariest thing. It's using subtle cues around. But yeah, can something be? I think I completely agree with you. Can something be too scary? I mean, that's very contextual as well. It's up to each person, but I personally don't think so. I think that basically it's a suspension of disbelief, and if you achieve something that's very, very scary, that's fantastic.
I think it's good for you.
I think we need something that's very scary early on.
Another audience is asking, our film school is starting to explore the language of VR, and in fact, yes, we're actually exploring this together with MIT OpenCourseWare. And also, Columbia Film School is starting to go towards that direction as well. Various film schools we're working with in China as well, in Shanghai, and also in Beijing, they're starting to look into VR as the next form of storytelling. A lot of online schools are actually doing the same thing as well. So yeah, for sure. Film schools are definitely looking to explore this medium. And else, we personally think that, old school directors and old school actors, Hollywood actors, and they might not be the ones who lead and pave the way for the future of this particular medium of storytelling. In fact, it's these people from the East Coast, even the theatrical, the Broadway people who are used to expressing their emotions in grandeur scales because they have to present for an audience further away. I think maybe they will be the ones who are leading the charge for VR storytelling. And of course, visual artists are fantastic at really directing your attention. Directors who are used to these close-ups and these toolkits that Hollywood has been so famous for may not be so good at transitioning over to VR. So yeah, film schools definitely are exploring this area, and they're doing it in a very different way than traditional film. So I'm happy to see that as well. Another question here is, what about actors? They have to be used to being filmed from all angles at all times. Is there a different technique? So yes, kind of like what I just highlighted before, actors for sure have to be very, very, very different in this case. And theatrical actresses and actors, people who are used to being on stage, musical actors, they're usually the best for this kind of, I guess, art form, because they're used to being seen from all different angles. They're used to projecting their voices, projecting their emotions towards a faraway audience. Alex, do you have any data on your end to kind of supplement or support this claim?
Yeah, so no specific data on kind of like actors, but I think what's incredible to see is we saw Shamir, one of our very, very close friends, Travis. He wrote a piece for us on that blog that we'll be posting up afterwards on the VR Oasis, and he wrote that how they needed to scrap kind of like a pretty decent actor that will remain unnamed for their project. And what they did is they got exactly what you said, kind of a theater actor instead, and replaced with theater actor, and had to reshoot the entire thing, but it came out phenomenally better. So I think that there is a kind of renaissance or this nice marriage between theater and VR, and how that's actually moving the medium forward, just because they're predisposed to acting within that kind of 180 scene. And using very visceral with their movements and moving around much more intensely than a kind of actor that's directed will do.
Yeah, so if you're interested in how that differ, you can actually look at a piece by Felix and Paul called Ka. It's the Cirque du Soleil, I guess, crossover into virtual reality, where they did a specific performance simply for VR. And you can see how the actors were able to really, bring themselves out in this aspect. So I think we are about out of time, but I guess any more questions, maybe last one. Okay, actually we are out of time. So yeah, how private is the data? We're gonna release some, I guess, public data, right, Alex? Something we can kind of show. We can definitely come up with something that, the findings, the things we've learned, and really publish it out as like, a semi-white paper kind of stuff. And so you guys can all look into it and see how you can use it. Some of the data, because we're working with brands and sensitive topics. But yeah, we can definitely come up with something where we can cross out the names and make anonymous a lot of things and see if we can put it publicly available. Yeah, for sure. But thank you guys so much for you guys tuning in, and follow our blog until next time. All right.
Thank you guys so much, and thanks for the opportunity.